The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local journalism today at chly.ca/donate. Local news doesn't survive without local support.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. Nanaimo is looking at new rules to encourage more affordable housing in the community. The city is in the process of prezoning certain corridors for social housing. The exact definitions are still a work in progress, with public consultation planned to start later this month, ahead of the plan coming before City Council in the spring. For more information on Nanaimo's approach to zoning for social housing, including what that term means and what the public can do to shape the process, I spoke with a member of the city's planning department.
My name is Kasia Began, and I work for the City of Nanaimo in the Community Planning Department, and I am the project manager who's responsible for the pre-zoning for a social housing project.
And thank you for coming down to CHLY this morning. We're going to be talking, as you say, about a project pre-zoning for social housing. To start with, could you explain to me how you have defined what social housing is?
That's a great question. So this is a council priority action, and in that action it says, it uses the term affordable housing. And affordable housing is very challenging to define. And so we've decided to use the term non-market housing, which captures a range of different housing options. And one of those is social housing. And really what that means is it's housing for everybody. And it provides some level of subsidization so that it is below the average rate of market housing.
And I understand that not included in this definition are things like supportive housing or shelters.
That is correct. So under non-market housing, we include social housing. So there's no on-site supports. Supportive housing is on-site supports, and shelters are temporary beds for individuals that are experiencing homelessness.
So a lot of different terms out there: affordable housing, social housing, supportive housing. Is the thing for people to understand about this set of regulations we're talking about today, basically it is some form of housing where the rent or the price of the housing is less than whatever the average private market rent or value is out there, but it's not coming with any kind of like staff supports.
Exactly. You got it.
It's not just a blanket zone. You can go in and you can look at a map and see that there are certain areas near the downtown, for example, where this is going to be pre-zoned for up to 12 stories, certain areas where it is going to be up to 6 stories. How did you make some of those determinations?
So the decision was made through the council priority action, which reads to look at our urban centers and corridor future land use designations. So in City Plan Nanaimo Reimagined, which is our official community plan for the city of Nanaimo, which was adopted in 2022, it identifies areas for growth, and urban centers and our corridors are the areas we've identified for growth. And so as this is a pilot approach, we've decided to stick with the urban centers and corridors for now, as those allow up to 12 stories in our urban centers. So that includes our downtown as well as our secondary urban centers. And then our corridor designations, which include both mixed use and residential, they allow up to 6 stories. So we have policy that we heard from the community that they support those building heights. And in order to make social housing viable, we need the height often in order to have enough units to be able to make the project financially viable. So there is an opportunity that depending on how the project is implemented, if council supports it, that it could be expanded to other areas of the community.
Now, if we're talking about a policy to zone certain areas so that you wouldn't need to seek extra approval to make a 12-story building, if it had social housing, and social housing is defined as having rents that are below the market rent, how much of that building needs to be social housing? Does the whole thing have to be social housing? Is there a certain percentage? Has that been decided yet?
So our proposal currently is that 20% of the total units on that development site would have to meet the definition of social housing. The remainder could be market housing. And the reason being is that those market dwelling units could help subsidize the cost of the social housing units. And we're also looking at allowing commercial uses on the ground floor as another way to not only support the subsidization of those social housing units, but also to ensure we're still meeting the city plan policies that look at creating a complete community.
And I know you've talked about the idea of affordability is kind of hard to pin down. This definition we keep talking about is below what the market average is. Is there a threshold of like how much below? If something is $20 below the average market rent, does it still count as affordable social housing?
That's a great question, and that's one that we have been asking ourselves. How do you define affordable housing? It varies across jurisdictions in British Columbia, Canada, and the United States. And so the decision right now is to propose that it default to the definitions used by a funding organization, so be it federal, provincial, or municipal. Those definitions of affordable housing often vary year to year. It could be a mix of below market, which could be 10% below market. It could be rent geared to income. So depending on how much income you make, you pay rent based on that. Or it could be deep subsidies. And so because the mix is often changing for these funding programs, the proposal is to base the level of affordability on that funding program that's available at that time when the project is moving forward.
How does that mesh with the idea of you're pre-zoning these things and you're saying this can go ahead without having to put in kind of further bureaucratic red tape if the definition is sort of, well, it will depend on what the definition of some federal program in the future is?
That's why we're going to go out for consultation. We're going to not only get feedback from the general community, but we're going to meet with our nonprofit housing providers who have quite a bit of experience with implementing these kind of programs. And so we're going to hear back from them. Is there a need to define affordable housing or social housing for Nanaimo in terms of the level of affordability? Or can we default to the funding programs? And based on looking at other jurisdictions that had the most uptake in terms of success, they defaulted to the definitions used in the funding programs. So that's why we're proposing that at this moment.
Included on the map of areas that are pre-zoned are the heart of Commercial Street downtown and where we are, Victoria Crescent, having this conversation. Is there any consideration given to potential heritage buildings or anything like that in the policy? Of
course. City plan policies, there's much to consider, and one of those will be heritage protection and looking at ensuring that whatever policy or regulation moves forward with the social housing, that we are considering other important aspects to what makes our community so great.
Now, this is scheduled to have consultation in the month of February. Can you explain how people can still shape this policy and what that consultation will look like? Of
course. So consultation is proposed to take place from February 23rd until March 15th. And we'll have a survey out available for the public to provide their recommendations in terms of whether or not they support this initiative, and if they have any recommendations on the components that are going to build this framework. And then we're also going to be engaging directly with nonprofit housing providers, for-profit housing providers, as well as other agencies in order to get their feedback as those being the experts when it comes to the delivery of housing. And then we'll take all that information and determine whether or not the framework needs to be amended in any way, and then we'll bring it forward back to council for consideration.
Last year, a City of Nanaimo staff report suggested that the city was able to meet and even exceed its targets that were imposed by the province as far as how many units of housing had to be built here. But at the same time that there was not a single unit of new affordable housing created in the community. How will these changes address that?
That's a great question. So it will be an incentive offered to property owners in order to incentivize the construction of social housing. We did look at something called inclusionary zoning, we completed a financial feasibility assessment, and that is where you require a certain percentage of the units to meet some level of non-market housing definition, whatever that is. Unfortunately, it was found not viable for Nanaimo at the time. And so as opposed to using it as a requirement, we're looking at incentivizing the delivery of social housing by allowing those that meet this criteria that will be established through this framework to not have to go through a rezoning. And the reason being is that oftentimes social housing is paid for by government programs or donations, and those funding requirements favor shovel-ready projects. And rezoning can be a process that takes some time. And so in order to reduce that timeline and go directly to a development permit, which is favored by these funding programs, we will incentivize that by allowing parcels that meet certain definitions of the framework to be able to not go through a rezoning, go directly to a development permit.
Now, again, the areas we're talking about with this policy, there are large sections of downtown and then really a lot of things that are very close to terminal and the highway through town. Can you explain the difference between what would be allowed through this prezoning for things involving social housing versus on these parcels of land, what would be allowed if I was just a developer looking to make completely market housing? What does this adding social housing get me in terms of extra stories or what have you?
So currently, we have zoning in place for the city in our urban centers and our corridors that doesn't necessarily align with the policies that we have in city plan. So some of the parcels allow a single family home and others allow high-rise apartment buildings. It really varies currently. And so that property owner is still able to develop under their current zoning as of right. However, the proposal with this framework is it's called an overlay. And what that means, it's a regulation that is, like I mentioned, an incentive where a developer can choose to take advantage of this overlay where we allow a certain maximum height as well as uses and densities separate from what's currently permitted under the current zoning. And so if they meet the criteria within this overlay, they can request to take advantage of this incentive and develop under it.
How do these new rules that are in the process of being developed, how do they interact with the changes that the province sort of imposed on municipalities when it comes to zoning?
That's a great question. So we had quite a few changes come through with the province, one of them being the small-scale multi-unit housing, but that's more focused on single-family up to, I guess you would call your missing middle. We also had the transit-oriented area legislation, which is applicable to the Woodgrove area, to the Country Club area, as well as downtown. And so those work in unison because the densities that are permitted under the and the heights permitted under the transit-oriented areas are close in alignment with what is proposed with the overlay, which is also in alignment with city plan. And so it's all working in unison. And also the province also gave us the opportunity to use new tools where often we would secure road dedication, for example, through a rezoning. We can now do that at the building permit stage. So we are using the tools provided by the province, who is incentivizing local governments to pre-zone and go directly to development permit. We're using those tools in order to enable this framework.
And how much extra juice comes from the social housing aspect of it? How many extra stories, for example, would someone be able to get through this as opposed to just the current rules from the province that municipalities sort of have to follow?
So, for example, in our transit-oriented areas, the legislation requires that it go up to 10 stories. And so we would be supporting up to 12 stories per city plan. So it would be an additional 2 stories in our urban centers. And in terms of our corridors, depending on where the transit-oriented area legislation applies, sometimes it's above what city plan supports. The overlay is recommending that it align with city plan and allow a maximum of 6 stories.
And I know you suggested that the consultation that's still to come will include talking with nonprofit housing providers. Have you done any of that consultation so far with the nonprofit housing providers? And if so, what have you heard from them about why, for example, a year could go by and Nanaimo would have no new affordable housing units?
So we are often in talks with our nonprofit housing providers, most recently through a new permissive tax exemption policy that we worked in partnership with them on. And during that engagement, we did hear that there are challenges in terms of the delivery of nonprofit housing or social housing. And oftentimes it relates to, based on what we heard, is the process on how to develop, which is kind of the expertise of the market developers. So this is an opportunity for the nonprofits to partner with the market developers and bring their expertise together to try to not only deliver social housing, but as well as more housing that we need in Nanaimo.
And what have you seen as far as other municipalities' approaches to this issue? What are the different approaches they're taking? Which ones seem to be working well? And what pieces are you trying to steal, if you will, and incorporate into this policy?
So we've seen up to 7 jurisdictions in British Columbia apply similar approaches to incentivizing social housing. And we found that those that had regulations that were more permissive, less restrictive, had the most success. And those that, for example, required that 100% of the units meet the definition of social housing saw no uptake. And I believe the rationale for that is that the market is continuously changing. And so if you put a regulation in place that is quite strict and the market demands change or the market conditions change or the funding model changes, it's challenging for the municipality to react to that. And so we found that, for example, like the district of Saanich, they found the most success because their regulations were quite broad in terms of what was permitted. And so we've decided to take a very similar approach where we are relying more on the funding model in terms of their requirements as opposed to overlaying additional regulations on top of what's already required by the funders.
So what I'm hearing there is essentially that if someone is going to be building social housing or housing that is below market rates, then there's already going to be some kind of government funding and incentive in place for people to do that, absent the city level. And so you're just trying to default to whatever that program is. Like social housing isn't made by the private market, essentially. And so you're trying to not impose extra rules on whatever processes are funding that.
Yeah, often we get requests from nonprofit housing providers to provide letters of support for their funding applications. And that's where ourselves as well as other jurisdictions have seen where a rezoning is required, we lose a check mark. Where they can go directly to development permit, they receive more points. And so the closer they are able to get to the point of being able to develop, the more likely their application will be chosen. Where rezoning is required because of the time it takes to go through rezoning, we've heard from them that delay may cause them to lose their ability to receive funding. And so we're trying to support that hurdle that we heard from the nonprofit housing providers.
So basically, Nanaimo's role in all of this is saying to whoever is looking to build social housing, you can make it a little taller than you could if this were just a private market development. And you're trying to include some minimum threshold definition that this has to be a little bit affordable, but you're trying to be cautious as to not making that definition so strict that providers will just build their non-market housing in some other place.
Yeah, and that's what we want to hear from the community and the nonprofit housing providers. Should we define the level of affordability for social housing? Should we default to the definitions used within the funding program? That's to be determined. And that's a really important part because we want to make sure that if we are pre-zoning land, that we are actually securing the housing that our community needs and that social housing that our community needs.
So anyone listening to this should take away that this process is ongoing. The goal is to take these sections of town and pre-zone them for social housing. Social housing is going to mean the housing costs less than the market rate, but exactly how much less and perhaps for exactly how long. Those rules are still to be determined over the next couple of months. And then this is going to come back to Nanaimo City Council with a little bit more detail, and they're going to weigh in on it. Is that a fair summary of where things are at?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We want to hear from the community about what do you think about the scope of where it's going to apply? What do you think about defining affordability? What do you think in terms of the conditions that we're imposing? For example, we're saying that some of these units should be secured for 60 years through a housing agreement. So it's kind of like a building block of Lego that we're creating this framework. And we want to hear from the community about those different aspects of that framework and make sure that everyone in our community supports what we're proposing to do.
And what are the timelines? You've talked already about the timelines for consultation, going to open up at February 23rd. What about when this is going to be decided upon and be something that comes back before council?
So we'll be bringing something back to council in the spring of 2026. And so we're trying to bring this forward as soon as possible because it is a priority action for council and a great need within our community.
Is there anything else you think it's important for people in Nanaimo to understand about this social housing prezoning project?
Most importantly, this housing is for everybody. It's from individuals, it's for families, it's for people in our community that cannot afford to pay the market rates for rental at the moment. And so we want to ensure that we have housing for those individuals and families. And we are trying our best to incentivize it through this prezoning project. So we'd like to hear from the community, their thoughts on it. We have a project page at getinvolvednanaimo.ca /prezoning social housing. We're going to have an FAQ on there. If you have any questions about this project, please feel free to send them to staff. We will be happy to answer them. And we really like to hear from the community on this project because it's really important. And I think right now, based on our market conditions, this is a really good option for us to try to deliver some social housing within Nanaimo.
And you've talked about how this is a bit of a pilot project, that it's fair to say that it's less than 10% of the parcels of land in Nanaimo that this applies to. Could you tell me about the potential transition of this one day from pilot project to wider project in the community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we'll have to monitor the success of the program over the next few years to see how much social housing is actually being constructed. If we're seeing that perhaps we're not getting as much as our housing needs report says we need, we can look at expanding it to other portions of the community. And maybe that will actually happen now. Maybe we'll hear from our community and nonprofit housing providers that perhaps it should be expanded currently, but we need to hear from them about that. So we will have to amend the regulations proposed if that's the case, because those are different housing forms. We're looking at medium to lower density apartment buildings and townhouses. So we just want to ensure that wherever the need is, we're providing the incentives to try to build it.
Kasia Began, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me on this.
Thank you.
Kasia Began is the project manager for Nanaimo's ongoing project, pre-zoning sections of the city for social housing.
Midcoast Morning is part of our nonprofit newsroom project, supported by listeners like you. Keep this program on the air by funding it today with a monthly sustaining donation at chly.ca/donate. We've got tote bags and shirts if you need an incentive.
A new cooperative housing development in North Cowichan is expected to bring 92 affordable apartments to the community. Announced in January, the project involves contributions from all three levels of government. With Nanaimo currently looking at a pre-zoning process for social housing, I spoke with the Cooperative Housing Federation of BC's CEO for some perspective on what would help get social housing built in Nanaimo and what the road was to the project in North Cowichan.
My name is Thom Armstrong. I'm the CEO of the Cooperative Housing Federation of BC and the Community Land Trust Foundation.
And in January, funding for 92 co-op homes, apartments in North Cowichan was announced. What did it take to get that project to that point?
Well, I'll say it took a lot from all three levels of government. The North Cowichan Co-op is actually a perfect case study in how all three levels of government can come together and invest in the production of new permanently affordable co-op homes. So in the case of North Cowichan, I have to first of all applaud the leadership of Mayor Rob Douglas. He's been championing this project since well before he even ran for council the first time. So this is a 10-year labor of love for the mayor. And without that leadership, it's doubtful that we would be talking about the co-op today. But it really, when you're talking about permanently affordable housing, the costs are so significant and the barriers are so formidable that if all three levels of government aren't coming to the table to invest what they can, to do what they can, use the tools they have in their toolkit, then it just doesn't get done. So in the case of a municipality, first and foremost, if they have land to vend into the development at a very nominal rate, that cuts the cost of construction and the capital costs significantly. So in this case, the district did own a piece of property. Its freehold value is something in the neighborhood of $3.1 million, but instead of turning that into a capital gain, they've leased it to us for 99 years at a very nominal value. So that's $3 million straight off the capital cost of a housing development that would otherwise have been more expensive. The next thing they did was waive their development charges on the property. So that would have added another $500,000 to the development by waiving that. If you're a private developer and you're looking at developing homes in a municipality and you have to pay those development costs, you really just factor it into the profit margin you've already budgeted for the development. But we're a social purpose real estate developer. We develop at cost without expecting a profit. So when our costs go up, whether it's municipal levies or land or anything else, those costs go straight to day one rents for low and moderate income co-op members. In this case, the $500,000 in municipal levies makes a real contribution to affordability. And finally, the last thing, it's frequently overlooked, and we may talk about that in a few minutes in relation to another municipality, time. The cost and the time of going through the municipal zoning and approval process can sometimes add $500,000 to $1 million to the development of a new non-market housing, whether it's a co-op or a nonprofit society. And that again is a cost that goes straight to day one rents. So land, waiving fees and speeding up the process and introducing more certainty to it, those are the things that are in a municipality's toolkit. And in this case, North Cowichan used them all.
Now, as we're having this conversation, what do you think it's important people understand about what co-op housing is and how it might differ from other forms of affordable or social housing people might hear get talked about?
I'm glad you asked that, because sometimes co-ops are called the best kept secret in the housing ecosystem because they're neither a rental model or an ownership model. A co-op's just an association created by members to provide services they can't provide to themselves. And in a housing co-op, the service is housing, permanently affordable housing. So members of a co-op live in the housing that's owned by the association that they own. So they're both in the same time landlord and tenant. And it means that there's a democratic control on a one-member, one-vote basis over the basic rules and regulations that apply to living in the co-op. And it also creates the opportunity to make for amazing communities. So in this case, because we're building homes for residents, not for investors, fully 58 of the 92 homes in the new North Cowichan Co-op will be 3-bedroom homes. And that means homes for people who can't wait to live in North Cowichan, young families, people who work in the region, who might not have been able to afford a home of their own in the region. Now they can look forward to a permanently affordable home in an amazing community near great community amenities, and we just can't wait to welcome them to their homes.
And now when you've got a new building with 92 different apartments for people in a co-op, presumably the cost to live there is less than in the private market. How do you select people to get into the project? How does someone get one of those spaces?
It's a pretty open process, to be honest. We will, at some point in the next year, open up a website portal for people to apply. And after that, it just becomes really a question of matching household sizes and incomes to homes in the co-op based on the agreements that we've signed with government. But all you really have to do to qualify to be a member in a housing co-op is explain to the co-op board, which will be incorporated shortly, why you want to live in the co-op, what you will do to make a contribution to the community, and then demonstrate that your income and your household size matches the requirements of whatever government funding applies, and you're good to go.
Now, Nanaimo is in the process of prezoning different sections of the city for various forms of social housing, including potentially co-op homes. What would it take to get a new co-op development going in a city like Nanaimo?
Well, you've pointed to the very first important thing that a city can do, and that's to make the zoning and the application for a development permit quicker, easier, and more predictable. If you can add certainty to the process around timeline and outcomes, then you've really got the first important step in generating that new permanently affordable community. After that, it's a question of looking around to see if the municipality might have some land in a land bank that it's willing to vend into the process, and then working with a partner like a community land trust, like a nonprofit housing society, to be a partner whose focus is on the mission of providing permanently affordable homes, not on delivering a return to shareholders.
Now, it's my understanding that this policy in Nanaimo is still under development. They're planning on talking to both members of the general public and people in perhaps the development industry and people from nonprofit housing providers. Some of the questions the city is still grappling with are when they're talking about affordable homes, they know that that's going to mean people will pay less than the kind of the private rates. But they don't necessarily know how much less yet. They're still working on a definition of maybe for how long that housing needs to be. When it comes to details like that, are there any things that you would like to weigh in on the process that could help get more affordable or co-op homes built?
Boy, there sure are. And there's a lot to unpack in what you just asked. I'd say, first of all, be ambitious around the length of time you expect your affordability expectations to apply to. Some of the partnership deals we've seen made with private developers over the years by municipalities who don't think they have any other options, you'll see affordability in place for 5 or 10, in some cases 20 years. But when you partner with a community land trust, what we're offering is permanent affordability. And that is a guarantee that comes with the mission that's baked into the community land trust model. So we're not looking to build homes under a temporary affordability covenant and then get out from under the obligations of that covenant as soon as we possibly can. We embrace the notion of permanent long-term affordability, and that's what we would bring to the table. Now, you raise a really important question about trying to decide on the metrics of what affordability really means up front. And that's where we've seen some municipal councils kind of tie themselves up in knots in the past, because you can have in the back of your mind a notion of what the affordability metric looks like for you. And then senior level government programs come along, whether it's the provincial BC Builds or the Community Housing Fund. You might have the federal co-op development program, the Affordable Housing Fund run federally, and they all come with different definitions of affordability. And if the definition that you've built into your municipal policy is just a little bit offside what the funding you can have access to permits, then you've got a problem because you don't meet the terms of that policy. And you could have an opportunity to build, let's use North Cowichan as an example, 92 permanently affordable homes. And if you're still wrestling with the terms of an affordability policy that's just offside what you can actually afford to build in the market, then you miss that opportunity, you miss that funding cycle altogether. So, the city of Victoria not that long ago wrestled with the same problem. And the answer they came up with is so sensible that we don't know why it's not being picked up everywhere else. They've essentially said to the entire community housing sector, we know that because the mission you bring to your work is permanent affordability, we know that you're going to make every home you build as deeply affordable as you possibly can, given the market conditions you're working with on day one. And we know that because you're operating housing at cost after that, it's only going to get more affordable. So that's what we're going to require of you, to make those homes as affordable as they can possibly be without having to stack up against some artificially generated definition of what affordable means. And that's the approach I would recommend to any municipality looking at how to create meaningful partnerships with the community housing sector, because we will make new homes as affordable as they can possibly be on day one, given the terms of financing, given the grants that are available, and given the contributions that municipalities can make to the process.
And my understanding in speaking with the project manager in Nanaimo was that at the moment they're leaning towards sort of trying to align their definitions of affordability with whatever the definitions of affordability in provincial and federal grant programs happen to be, is at least my understanding of that situation.
Yeah, that would work, as a moment fixed in time. So, I think you put it very well. The way, those provincial and federal programs exist now. The trouble with that is that they may not exist in that form 6 months or 6 years from now. And the definition you thought made perfect sense at the time you adopted it is now out of sync with the terms of the funding that is available. So, to use North Cowichan as an example, 20% of the homes there will be available to people at shelter rate. And that, of course, is anything from $445 to $725 a month. 50% of the homes will be available on a rent geared to income basis at an average of 80% of CMHC median rents in the area. So there's a metric that we'll do our best to hit. And then low end of market homes for the other 20% or 30% of the home. So it's a very complex mix, but it can be done.
What is the current state of provincial and federal grant funding opportunities? And is it fair to say that new co-op homes are really dependent on that funding existing? And if so, are there currently opportunities for it?
It absolutely is fair to say that they depend on those opportunities. I'll be honest, the approaching provincial budget on February 17 is making everybody a bit nervous because the province has a very challenging fiscal situation to deal with. And we've been waiting for some time for the latest announcements on the results of the last proposal call under the Community Housing Fund. And there's no indication, at least to date, perhaps it's being saved for the budget, that there will be a further funding call for the Community Housing Fund provincially. So everybody is kind of on the edge of their seats, wondering if that investment is going to continue. The province made an absolutely historic investment in affordable housing back in 2017. On a per capita basis, dwarfed the contribution being made by any other province in the country. That was at a time when the provincial fiscal situation seemed a bit rosier than it does now. But, I'd argue that counter-cyclical investments in housing are exactly what's needed to drive permanent affordability and to create a supply of new permanently affordable homes. So this is the time for the province to be doubling down on its investment in affordable housing, not cutting back. So we don't know what's going to be in the February 17th budget. We're hopeful, but we're also a little nervous. Federally, we have a new federal co-op development program. We have the new Build Canada Homes platform. Minister Gregor Robertson from Vancouver is responsible for making those investments. It's the first time in a long while that the federal and provincial governments have come to the table with significant investments in housing at exactly the same time and created programs that are actually quite stackable. They work well together and they deliver the kind of affordability that I've described for the North Cowichan Co-op. So we're hopeful. This is a great window of opportunity for co-ops and nonprofit housing, and we hope that government investment will continue to support those efforts.
Is there anything else you think it's important to bring to the conversation today, be it about the North Cowichan Co-op that's on the way, be it about the prezoning process that's underway for social housing in Nanaimo?
I'd say that everything we're doing is a step in the right direction, but it's not nearly enough. The percentage of overall housing stock in Canada that operates outside the market is about 3%. And that compares to some European economies where the non-market housing stock could make up to 20% of the overall housing stock. And what we've been missing in Canada is a build out of a much more robust non-market housing sector, so that as rents become disconnected from incomes in so many communities across the province, that people can still afford to live and live a good life where they work, where they raise their kids, where they go to school. And that's what the community housing sector is motivated to accomplish, but we do need investment from government to make that happen.
Thom Armstrong, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me on this.
Always a pleasure.
Thom Armstrong is CEO of the Cooperative Housing Federation of BC. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and RB Frew is our technical advisor. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. You can get in touch with us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
This program gives thanks to the Nanaimo First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.